I'm Dave Mullins. I'm a podiatric surgeon and healthcare attorney in Northern California. I'm also the author of the book, How to Win Medicare Appeals, published by the American Bar Association. This podcast is based on that book, and this is episode number 6 in the podcast. Let's get started. Does Medicare have a definition for medically reasonable and necessary? Yes, Medicare does. You can find that definition at section 13.5.4 of the Medicare Program Integrity Manual. And that definition requires, in order for a service to be medically reasonable and necessary, the service must be both safe and effective. It cannot be either experimental or investigational. It has to be appropriate as to duration and frequency of use. It has to meet the accepted standard of practice. It has to meet but not exceed the patient's needs, and it must be at least as beneficial as the Medicare-approved alternative that Medicare wanted your provider client to use. What will you have to prove under medically reasonable and necessary when the issues are safety and/or effectiveness in order to win the ALJ appeal? You're going to have to prove that what your client provider did was safer and more effective than what Medicare wanted, or was as effective but safer, or was as safe but more effective than what Medicare wanted. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to prove one of those three in order to win the medically reasonable and necessary argument with the administrative law judge. How should you decide whether to cite and whether to include a document from the patient's chart in your letter brief? I think you should use a simple two-part test. First question, will the ALJ read and understand the document that you're thinking about including in the letter brief? If the answer is yes, second question, will that document sway the ALJ in favor of payment? If the answer is yes to both of these questions, cite the document in the letter and include it as an attachment to the letter. But no matter how attractive a document may be, if the ALJ is not going to read it, or will not understand it, or will not be swayed by it, don't cite the document in the letter and do not include it as an attachment to the letter. The best example of a document that fit this definition was the radiation oncologist treatment plan that was and is always printed in at least 3 to 5 different colors with a laser printer and is in itself a piece of art. There isn't an administrative law judge, alive or dead, who would understand one of those radiation oncology treatment plans. So that was an example of a document that I never sent to an ALJ as part of the letter brief. What will the letter brief do for you that you can't do any other way? The letter brief allows you to speak to the administrative law judge without interruption and without opposition. And the letter brief allows you to frame the patient dispute for the ALJ, so the ALJ sees the dispute the same way you see the dispute. Why will the ALJ consider your letter brief to be nothing short of a miracle? Because instead of copying the patient's complete chart and then sending everything without organizing or explaining anything like everybody else does, your letter brief is going to provide clear arguments with immediate access to the documents supporting those arguments. How will your letter brief avoid denials based on ignorance? If the ALJ does not understand the medicine in your case, or if the ALJ is unaware of the authorities supporting what your client provider did, you're going to lose. But if the ALJ does understand the medicine in your case and is aware of the authorities supporting what was done, at the very least, your ALJ is not going to deny your appeal out of ignorance. How many close call ALJ cases are lost because the ALJ does not understand the medicine or is unaware of the authorities supporting what was done? Out of all of the ALJ cases that have been lost but could have been won, I think a very large percentage of those cases were lost for those very reasons. You want to make sure that the five questions are answered in your letter brief, and you want to make sure the answers to those five questions are very clear. Let's do those five questions. 1. What was wrong with the patient? 2. Why did that problem require treatment? 3. Exactly what was done for the patient, and why was that the best choice at that time for that patient? 4. How do you know that was the best choice? Meaning, what authorities support what was done? And 5. How were Medicare's denial reasons wrongly applied, or much more commonly, why should the Medicare denial reason, meaning the Medicare payment policy that applies to your claim, not be applied? Is it ever okay to not send a letter brief? I would say the answer is emphatically no. Even a one-page letter will allow you to frame your provider's arguments in a voice that's persuasive and in a light most favorable to your client provider. You want the ALJ to already be biased in your favor as she's walking into that remote administrative law judge hearing room, and your letter brief will do that for you. What message are you sending when you don't send a pre-hearing letter brief? Your provider client is asking the administrative law judge to go out on a limb after that claim has already been denied at 3 separate levels: the initially submitted claim, the first level redetermination appeal, and the second level reconsideration appeal have all been denied. If you were the ALJ, would you go out on that limb and award payment if the provider is so lazy that the provider can't even be bothered to submit a one-page letter explaining why the claim should be paid? I don't think I would. Speaking of which, I've received requests from people who want to get started doing these Medicare appeals, and they've been asking me if I'd be willing to help with their Medicare appeals. The answer is yes. I would be happy to help you with your Medicare appeals, and I'm willing to do this on a contingency fee basis, meaning if you don't win your appeal with my help, I don't get paid. You can contact me through LinkedIn. Just put my name in, David Mullins, DPMJD, or you can write at this email address. But I'd be happy to help you with your Medicare appeals. That's it for today. I'll see you next week.